3 days and for 3 nights. And from the belly of the fish, he prayed to Yahweh, his God. And he said, out of my deepest despair, I cried to you, and you answered me. From the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. You threw me into the deep, into the heart of the sea, and the floods overwhelmed me. All your waves, your torrents, washed over me. And I said, I'm banished from your sight. Will I ever again look upon your holy temple? The waters surrounded me right by my throat, and the deep enclosed me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head, and I sank down to the roots of the mountains. The vaults of the earth closed over me in forever. But you raised my life back up from the pit. Oh, Yahweh, my God, just as my soul was ebbing away, I remembered Yahweh, my God, and my prayer came before you in your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols forsake their own well-being, but I will sacrifice to you with a song of thanksgiving. I will fulfill the vow I made, because deliverance comes from Yahweh. And then God spoke to the fish, and the fish vomited Jonah up onto the shore. And the word of Yahweh came a second time to Jonah, saying, get up, go to the great city of Nineveh, and preach to them as I told you to do. And Jonah set out and went to Nineveh in obedience to the word of Yahweh. Peter, come and share with us. So again, welcome. Welcome to the village. Welcome to Village Life. I hope you're starting to enjoy it.
Yeah.
So, where did you grow up, and do you have a special memory about growing up that you'd like to share with us?
I grew up in paradise. Not literally. I grew up in a tiny little farming village in rural North Somerset, miles from anywhere. And I think it's got to be the most perfect place on the planet. I still think that. So, yeah.
Wow.
I've got a lot of special memories about it.
Okay.
But actually, most of my really special memories are about my grandfather, who was a Methodist lay preacher and a poet and an artist and a gardener. And my life has taken after him somewhat. And I've got all kinds of great memories about him, but one of them that I just want to tell you about was how we had to go and get a hostess trolley from someone's house for a church meal that was being organised. We had to go and get it, take it to the church. But for Grandpa, nothing was mundane. Nothing was just going and getting a trolley and taking it to the church. No, we had to hunt down a wild trolley, living in its natural state. We took some ropes with us. We roped the wild trolley, and we dragged it back through the streets of Colleton to the church as it was trying to get away down the hill. And we brought it in, and we introduced it to its new home and got it settled in. Yeah. Everything was magic with Grandpa.
Storyteller.
He was.
Yeah. Wow. So, were your family religious growing up? Sorry, I know that your grandfather, of course, was.
Yeah. So Grandpa, yes, definitely. My father, not at all. He wasn't a churchgoer. He just wasn't interested. He described himself as an agnostic. It didn't really make sense to him, the church stuff at all. Just sounded a bit unreasonable, and that was fine. But he had nothing against other people's faith. Mum went to church sometimes, not all the time. We had a lot of other things going on, and she took us to Sunday school when there was a Sunday school available. But I think more partly because it's just what you do. But there wasn't anything like prayers at home. We didn't read the Bible or anything of that sort. And yet somehow, probably because of Grandpa and how important he was, I had this huge affinity for it.
Yeah.
quite early on, I decided when I was about 13 that I was going to read the Bible from one end to the other. Didn't make a word of sense to me at the age of 13, but, but I did it, you know. It was a project. I was going to get there. Even when I got stuck in the middle of Chronicles, I was going to get there. And I did strange things. I built a den in the overgrown brambles of an old orchard out in the fields. It had a bedroom in it, and a council tree where my friends and I used to sit, and a chapel with an altar that I wove out of willow twigs and a little cup and plate, and I celebrated communion for the birds and the squirrels. So obviously, even if I didn't know it, God had something in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, all these little things, they just...
Yeah, it sounds like your grandfather especially really touched you and touched your life.
Yeah.
It's amazing the difference grandparents can make, isn't it? Yeah. So, and I'm hoping this, do you consider yourself a Christian?
Yes.
Thank goodness for that. So tell us about your faith and how it affects your life. I mean, obviously, you know, you're an ordained minister, but how does it affect your life every day? How does it affect the way that you approach life and the way that you live life?
In some ways it's hard to say how it affects things, because I can't remember now what it was like not to have that faith. Even though I went through a period of sort of my late childhood up to about university where I was vehement that I was an atheist because I was going to be a scientist, and you couldn't be both. Everyone says so. Nonetheless, I can't remember what that felt like.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say what difference it's making.
Mm.
But for one thing, I do try and take Jesus as my sort of touchstone for what's the right thing to do.
Mm.
You know, it sounds a bit trite to say what would Jesus do, but just take that whole message, you know, that starts with coming and joining us at all and ends with being willing to die for us, and put everything through the lens of that, as that's my touchstone for working out, should I be doing this? Is this the right decision to make? Also, for me, the whole world is charged with spirituality. Nothing for me is just a thing. Nothing's just an object with only material characteristics. Everything is just like luminescent with depth and meaning. So, yeah.
Wow. Are there any experiences that you might think of as turning points in your spiritual life? I mean, you know, you talked about your grandfather, and I'm certain that had an effect, but are there any specific events that you can look back on and go, that was a moment in time when suddenly I can look back and go, you know, there was a cut-off point there, something happened?
Lots, actually. So there was a definite point, and I don't know exactly when it was, but at some point in my childhood, I must have been around 10, when I started sort of focusing my studies towards science and things, and everyone was telling me, you can't believe these two things. I'm not sure I'd call it a spiritual turning point, but it was a point at which I decided this isn't something I'm allowed or able to believe. And yet it was always there. It never went away. But I sort of put a block in. And that sort of stayed there. So I had this sort of spiritual split personality between this imaginative part of me that wrote poems to Jesus and things and was still really involved in it, and this other part of my mind that was like, no, I can't believe in this. You know, I'm off to study chemistry. This can't happen. And there was a point in my first term at uni when I sat down with a friend. It was actually SJ, who just talked to me a little while and just tore that wall down. I said, no, actually, these things are not mutually incompatible. And it wasn't by specifically reasoning, because I could do all the reasoning by myself, but it was like having permission to open the door. And then it was just like two worlds collided, and I was like, whoa, this is so exciting. And I couldn't stop talking about it for weeks. And it was like I could be a whole person again, that my spiritual side and my intellectual side just remeshed. That was great. And the more I studied chemistry, the more it meshed, and the more it worked, and the more I was like, no, actually, these two things are perfectly wonderful, especially when I got into evolution and genetics, and I was like, yay, this is all great.
Yeah.
I'm happy with God being part of this.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a turning point.
Wow.
But then near the end of uni, there was another one, because when that happened, I was sort of welcomed into the arms of like the Christian Union, the local evangelical church full of students and everything, and they were all wonderful. Yay, you've had a conversion experience. And I was like, I'm not sure I'd describe it as a conversion experience as such, but okay, I'll go with it. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and I still wasn't straight. They waited a bit longer. They had a few meetings with me, called me in to talk, pray, study a few texts together. I still wasn't straight. And eventually they were just like, well, this isn't working, conversion didn't take. Bye! And so I had this moment of real despair, because I was like, still believe in God, still in love with Jesus, still actually quite fond of this Bible thing, despite the fact you keep hitting me with it. But the whole community's turned its back on me, except, you know, a small handful of people. And that was a turning point, because that was when I realised that even if it was just me and God, it was still me and God. And I didn't need a community. I'd like a community. Community is wonderful. Didn't need it. I didn't need anyone to interpret for me. That was when I realised it was always at the root of it. Other people's opinions really didn't matter.
Is that when you started to connect with MCC?
No, we vaguely knew MCC existed. Myself and SG and a couple of other friends started what we called the College Christian Fellowship, which was basically for those who were not welcome at the College Christian Union, because they weren't as union as all that. That ran while we were at university, and we joined LGCM and the Student Christian Movement and other welcoming groups. I started going to the local Methodist church because they were lovely, and we sort of knew MCC was out there, but we knew there wasn't one in Cambridge. And then one by one, as we graduated, all followed each other down to Brighton, and half of us ended up sharing a house. You know, Laura and all of us. And we looked around and we couldn't find an MCC, so we just thought, oh, okay, there isn't one here. And actually there wasn't at the time. And started going to a local Anglican church, which was welcoming and perfectly supportive and lovely. And then one day, we were living on Margaret Street, just down that way. Laura went for a walk in the evening, and she came back and said, I found the MCC. Because she was walking along and she heard singing. I thought, well, that sounds nice. I'll pop in and see who's singing. And she stayed for the service. And then she said, you've got to come along. You've got to come back and meet these people. So I went along and I joined. And then after a while, with some reluctance, my partner also joined and decided actually it was quite a good church as well. And that's how it happened.
Yeah.
My housemate heard singing.
Wow.
Wandered in.
Why? You've answered this really, but why is MCC important to you? Why have you chosen MCC to serve in rather than, you know?
Partly because in MCC, right from the beginning, I was allowed to serve, not just be there and keep quiet. But it's like there weren't any closed doors. Which was amazing enough for someone who identified as L or G or B was even more amazing if you identified as T, you know, as a trans person, the idea that I was ready to push, but the doors weren't locked, and that was amazing. So partly because for me it's all about service, you know, just the idea that no one was going to put any barriers in front of me serving. And also, here and now, especially with the way things are going in the world at the moment, there are a lot of battles that people are called to fight for Jesus' sake. This is the one I'm called to fight with this community. So.
Yeah. It actually mirrors my own story a little, because I always say that I came to MCC in the first place because it was LGBT affirming, but that's not why I stayed. You know, I stayed because actually I found Jesus here, and I found my calling here, and I found the Spirit of God here, and all of those things are what brought me to service here. So yeah, I understand that. Yeah, wow.
It's alive.
It is.
MCC's alive.
It is. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about the doors is, you're right. You know, I've in 25 years in MCC, I've never yet pushed on a door that was locked. There might have given some resistance, but it wasn't locked. And I've been able to look on the other side and go, no, that's not for me. And then, whereas I've been able to explore, which is just so valuable. I talk to other Christians, and they've never had that opportunity because they've been in this one little spot, taught to believe this one little thing, and you know, whereas actually just to be led by the Spirit, to allow Jesus just to lead you wherever Jesus wants to.
Yeah.
That's, yeah. So
also that you can wander off in some very odd directions and fall over and get hurt and make all kinds of mistakes. You're still there.
Yeah.
MCC is still there when I came back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've made my fair share of mistakes.
Oh, amen. So, why did you choose the bit of scripture that we started the service with this evening?
Well, that's got to do with those mistakes.
Okay.
Because in my journey to where I am now, I've gone pretty way off track at times. You know, God sent me to Nineveh and I didn't want to go. I had my own ideas. And I've been in that belly of the fish, bottom of the sea, almost totally despair. It's never been 100% despair, because somewhere I've always known that God's got me, even if it was really hard to find. But there have been some really painful, horrible times that I really, really, really never want to go through again. But I can see perfectly well that they are the times that have made me who I am and given me the gift that I have to use now. So I'm not ungrateful, and I appreciate that I had to go through it, and I'm really grateful for what God taught me, and I'd really rather not do it again.
The one phrase in my own spiritual journey that I really kind of cringe at is the growth opportunity. Yeah, it's always difficult.
Yes, it was. Didn't like it.
Yeah.
So, and there've been a number of those, you know, such as the time when I was at university and Christian Union and the church turned their backs on me and everything, and much more recently when I've made some really daft mistakes in my life, and I thought, right, that's it, I've mucked it up for good now. Never going to be a minister. I'm never going to, you know, have my life sorted again. I've really, really messed it up now. And yet, you know, turns out that, you know, God wasn't done with me yet. But what I like about that is that there's Jonah, and he admits it's all got too much for him, and God gives him a second chance, and he goes off. Okay, this time, going to be obedient, going to Nineveh. But he hasn't finished messing up yet. He's going to do it again before the end of the story. And so I'm like, whenever I think, okay, I'm on my way to Nineveh, I remember, I'm probably going to mess up again. No matter how hard I try, because I'm only human. But it's okay.
Yeah. So, Tell me a little bit about. I know that when you were ordained, you had a number of different invitations to serve. Why the village? And I know it wasn't just because we're in Brighton and this is a fabulous place. But tell me a little bit about what your vision is for the community and what.
I thought you said we only had 15 minutes.
We did, but I just,
When I visited, there was definitely an aliveness and a willingness to grow, to look outwards. Definitely, this was a community that's engaged with the world. It's not inward looking. It's ready to get up and go and do things and try things, which, is what a pastor longs to see in a church. But I mean, is that, it's... So I thought, what a wonderful opportunity, to really, really create a community that's... I mean, you've already created it, you are it, but, to work with a community that's really... it's not about just coming and sitting here on Sunday. So that just filled me with enthusiasm. And I have ideas. I've spoken briefly, and it was in the press release, about wanting to start a group for sort of going back to grassroots to look at the Bible text from a trans and gender variant perspective, just as feminist scholars once did and liberation scholars once did, but not as scholars, just as people with a different lived experience, to actually look at the text and say, am I seeing something different from what I've been told is there? So that's going to be exciting. And I think Brighton's a great place to start. I'd love to see it eventually roll out and communities be doing it all over, the world. But if you've got to start somewhere, this is a wonderful place to start. And also I'm passionate about the environment and green issues and climate issues, and I could tell almost straight away that so was this community that would be willing to work with me on doing something towards that. Yeah. Despite the lack of free allotment gardening space,
I had no idea.
Still keen that we should have a church community garden allotment where we can get the benefits that you get from doing the work of creating it, plus a whole load of free food to give to those who need it. So it's a win-win situation. Yeah. Slight lack of land issue going on, but I will find a way.
We are very, very blessed to have you with us, and I look forward to not just moving forward and doing some amazing things together. I look forward to us all making some mistakes together too. They're all just as valuable. Peter, thank you very much indeed.